Gravatio est. Enigma crudelitas est.
Welcome back, my fellow Alita Seekers. I've started reading Last Order Volume 1 of the manga, and as someone who's just a 4th Kyu, or Orange Belt, Alita's favorite belt, in Aikido, I wanted to address the martial arts known in the manga as Panzerkunst in relation to the supernatural. Now this is more of my interpretation, not necessarily Yukido's intent. One might not think there is a connection between martial arts and the supernatural, but in the word Aikido, for which it means the way of adapting the spirit. Now, spirit to most people simply just means one's personal character or attitude and will. But it's not just that. There is something deeper you can unlock, although extremely rare. In Last Order, Nova seems to hint that this is the Karmatron dynamics theory. Now, karma is known in Hinduism as the sum of a person's actions in this and previous states of existence, viewed as deciding their fate and future existence. Destiny or faith, following the effect from cause. In Christian perspective, our karma or our cause will determine the effect on whether we reach the next heaven, or if reincarnation is a reality in certain circumstances, then God may have you repeat life to redeem yourself, just as Alita has been given a second chance on life. Now, ki in Aikido also refers to one's willpower. It takes your will or action of discipline to become a master in something. So in my case, I have a master's in landscape architecture because I've spent a lot of time and my will to becoming one. So in martial arts, will is adapted, but in Aikido, a Shinto gate is sometimes used, like in my dojo, to remind us of the supernatural attainment we can gain through martial arts beyond the use of the physical body. Nova points out in the movie that it's not the body that's causing the extra force, but the martial arts of Panzerkunst. In the manga, Panzerkunst is German for armored art. It's the first martial arts to anticipate combat in zero gravity, originating on Mars. It's the fighting style used by Alita and a handful of practitioners. The names of all Panzerkunst moves and disciplines are in German, and the practitioners are called Künstlers, German for artists. Panzerkunst seeks oneness between the senses and is commonly referred to as the strongest of cyborg martial arts, especially effective in disabling and destroying larger opponents. It's a David and Goliath dynamic. Panzerkunst is the first fighting style developed to anticipate cyborg combat. It emphasizes the combat against both unarmed and armored opponents, including those wielding ranging weapons. Its foundation is fighting in zero gravity, a prerequisite for all space-age martial arts, which allows the practitioner to fight in a range of atmospheres. Panzerkunst seems to emphasize speed as well as the use of vibrations based on attacks to bypass an opponent's cyborg armor, and directly cause damage to the limbs and internal organs. Panzerkunst also provides a definitive tactical advantage, since it gives its users the ability to analyze the opponent's fighting style and to retaliate accordingly. Therefore, Künstlers will rarely be defeated in a second combat with a given enemy. Künstlers also seem to be imbued with the sense of fanaticism with the willingness to sacrifice themselves, if necessary to carry out a mission. 5 schools existed within the overall Panzerkunst framework. So far, the only ones that appear to have survived are the Mauser School and the Schneider School. The only other school mentioned thus so far is the Gauzen School, which already had been extinct for 200 years. There are 9 levels of Panzerkunst. Alita was a war orphan and was forced to become a Künstler. The techniques were engraved within the Künstler's psyche and could still be recalled many decades or even centuries later. In Alita's case, the true extent of what she knows is still in the process of being rediscovered, usually by events or circumstances that act as a trigger to jog her memory. Now, it's the Geheimnis techniques that might have a connection with the supernatural abilities for which Alita is discovering and Nova is fascinated with. He refers to this ability that Alita has as the Karmatron dynamics theory, or a metaphysical phenomenon causing a surge in force. We might call this Ki or even Tai Chi. I think it seems pretty clear that Yukito intended the concept of Karmatron dynamics to relate to Chi Force, which is also kind of the inspiration for the Force in Star Wars. Chi is simply believed to be the vital force forming part of any living entity. Chi translates as air or emptiness, and it manifests through material energy and life force or energy flow. Qi is central underlying principle in Chinese traditional medicine and Chinese martial arts. The practice of cultivating and balancing Qi or Qi is called Qigong. I do admit seeing this looks pretty stupid even for me as someone who's witnessed the supernatural and has studied some Aikido. But someone like Master Yang is very interesting case study to study up on, so I'll leave a link down below. Now there may be some stylization with Master Yang, but at the same time there could be a burst of extra energy granted by the divine, which Alita may have had as she ripped through Grishka's arm. Which doesn't seem possible. Even with advanced techniques, you're going to need some kind of burst of extra energy to do damage like that. Martial arts is about two things: the martial, or the primitive fighting instinct with no choreography and aesthetic, or philosophy, just a raging rampage of force. The art aspect puts control over that rage. It's a higher evolutionary form of fighting that seeks to mimic the divine movements of the body. The art part is about style or aesthetic and philosophy, to fight in a manner that is less primitive and more angelic, one could say. Whereas MMA is more of a practical and kind of a primitive fighting style that seeks to kill the opponents pretty much by brute force of the body alone, and doesn't really incorporate any ideas of trying to invoke the supernatural to gain an upper hand. Whereas something like Aikido seeks to control the opponent through complex principles of the body so as not to harm their opponent or themselves. Their philosophy is you cannot resist that which does not exist. In most Qigong practices, there is some acting in order to invoke the real phenomenon of Qi force energy control. Master Yang may be only a handful of people who may have reached a more supernatural use of martial arts. As there is choreography in Aikido, so too is there with Rosa Salazar's training, which looks realistic, but in reality there's really no direct pressure testing applied. Combining stylization and applied pressure is extremely hard, which is why most martial arts, when taking on an actual fight with random unpredictable moves, tend to resort back to more the primitive fighting style of wrestling, grappling, and boxing, like you might see with two gorillas. You could be a kung fu master, but if you never applied actual force fighting in an uncontrolled environment, then an MMA fighter could easily take on a kung fu master who's been at it for 50 years. So Aikido would be ineffective, but if you can unlock the supernatural Qi force, then that changes the game, but there are supernatural laws, so it's unlikely to be very practical. You could say Aikido is kind of the martial arts of Jesus. Actually, I think Jesus would be more of a Qigong master. Panzerkunst is supposed to incorporate the primitive primal rage fighting along with a stylized aesthetic with angelic moves. So pretty much mixed martial arts with stylization martial arts, like Aikido, which is a little unrealistic unless you can tap into that supernatural force. Now, in Judeo-Christian Islamic perspective, one might simply call this as God's life force or Holy Spirit flowing through you when God deems you worthy to use His power for the benefit of others, allowing you to break the laws of nature with your will and ki, and not necessarily from granted by an angel or demon. So this is related to the phenomenon of telekinesis or psychokinesis, granted by what we might call as God's Brahman, or more personal connection with God without you realizing it. It's tapping into God's power through your will of summoning, and summoning requires meditation, prayer, discipline, practice, and humbleness, and many other virtues to gain that grace. There is a dark side of the Qi, which is using the Qi of Jinn and yokais to grant you power for malevolent reasons. And this gets more into the occult side of things. So energy is granted either by God or His angels, or by more malevolent spirits we call Jinn or yokais in Japan. So one must be careful not to be tempted to harness the Qi force of a demonic spirit. So we might call this the dark side of the force. But it seems in most cases the supernatural small abilities, I might say, is granted to a few humble people. such as doctors and monks or priests, and even saints. So God allows these saints and monks to have this limited power to refine their soul and to benefit others. So chi is not something found in animals, because animals can't summon or be disciplined through their own pure will and choice. Their free will is limited and their karma is limited. So this is specifically granted to higher evolutionary creatures like us, or transhumanists like Alita, who have higher levels of self-awareness and karma. Now, Alita, being more advanced, will be able to tap into that power more than someone like Zapan, unless Zapan tries to tap into more demonic forces. But God will always make sure that good will be slightly ahead of evil, because in reality, yin and yang are not equal. If they are equal, we would be living in a very different kind of world. Think Lord of the Rings. Think having your wallet being teleported every day when you're late to work. Yeah, things would be very different, because right now the supernatural is extremely suppressed. Thank freaking God. Now, some Buddhists may disagree with me, but when you see someone having a physical force upon someone else without touching them, that's supernatural in the realm of limited magical abilities. So you might see a lot of anime that they emphasize, oh, it's not magic. It's magic, because, spoilers, when Alita produces a spirit bomb plasma thing coming out of her hands, that plasma has more mass and energy than her whole body. So the extra energy is coming from somewhere, most likely another dimension being granted to her through her will. The stronger her will, the more power she will be granted, depending on her virtues in the situation. So this is simply tapping into God's power through her strong willpower, without her maybe even realizing it that it's coming from God. So this is why Nova says, Alita, can you hear me? Only the use of the plasma can you defeat Sashimoto. However, the Maginal's body, unlike the Berserker body, isn't defaultly equipped with the plasma-producing organ. You'll need to create the plasma torch yourself, out of your will and imagination. This is why her body is called the Imaginos body. It is her angelic body, hence the title, Battle Angel. Her new body was designed to incorporate and handle the supernatural forces that would otherwise destroy her more primitive bodies. But you all might say, oh, Enigma, you're wrong. She has an antimatter heart directed through her magnetic veins into her fingertips, firing the laser. Whatever you say, Einstein, but saying high technology is pretty much the same thing as me saying magic. It's not an argument because it's not reality. At least with the supernatural, we do have some potential video evidence on the chi phenomenon. But yes, the fictional world of Alita, Yukito is playing a fine line between what is natural and what is supernatural. And that's what I like about cyberpunk. Yukito is hinting that there is something metaphysical here as the causation, hence Karmatron dynamics theory. But real science can distinguish between what is natural and what is supernatural. And we all know Alita believes in magic. I mean, look, they made her into a fairy on her tea bottle. What makes Alita Battle Angel interesting is it's not splattering you with overly powered super beings like in Dragon Ball Z or Marvel. It's not like Alita has the ability to teleport her body like Goku. That's a little ridiculous. Instead, the supernatural is subtle. Yukito leaves it open to the question of how technological evolution may lead to something more divine, and that is not necessarily a biological body that makes us into the image and likeness of God. As Alita says, even if your brain's a chip, a human being is a human being. There are many mysteries in being alive, and from birth, everyone carries those mysteries deep inside. Some never notice the mysteries, while some confront them head-on, and die confused still carrying them. To those who seek answers, these mysteries are a curse, but to those who take action, they are a blessing. For no matter how much power or influence someone has, these mysteries cannot be conquered, because God cannot be conquered.
Pravatio est. Enigma coderitas est.